Known as the Savage Mountain, it has a reputation that even seasoned climbers respect and fear. Unlike Everest, where success stories often make the headlines, K2 is a place where tragedy can unfold in silence, far from the cameras and crowds. Over the years, some of the most haunting deaths on its icy slopes have barely been mentioned outside the climbing world. These are not just stories of failed summits, but chilling reminders of how quickly ambition, weather, and fate can turn the world's second highest peak into a frozen graveyard. In the brutal summer of 1986, when K2 would earn the chilling nickname the Black Summer, one couple stood out among the climbers gathered at its base. Lillian and Maurice Barrard weren't just teammates. They were partners in life, in ambition, and in every dangerous ascent they had ever attempted. Known as the world's highest couple, they had already conquered giants like Gasherbrum II and Nanga Parbat, climbing fast and light in pure alpine style. To them, K2 was not just another mountain. It was the ultimate test of everything they believed in. Their expedition didn't begin smoothly. At one point, they even lost their entire budget: cash, passports, airline tickets, left behind in a taxi. For most people, that would have been the end of the dream. But somehow, everything was recovered, and the Barards still made their way to K2's base camp, determined as ever. Step by step, night after night, they pushed higher up the mountain, sleeping at terrifying altitudes where the air was so thin it felt like breathing through a straw. By the time they reached their final bivouac near the deadly bottleneck, they had nothing but a tent and sheer determination. No sleeping bags, no real protection from the freezing darkness. Just the mountain, the wind, and the cold. On June 23, 1986, the Barards, along with Wanda Rutkiewicz and Michel Parmentier, finally stood on the summit of K2. For a brief, fragile moment, it was triumph. Rutkiewicz became the first woman ever to reach the top. Just 30 minutes later, Lillian followed, becoming the second. Both did it without supplemental oxygen, a feat that only the strongest climbers could even attempt. But on K2, the summit is only halfway. The real danger begins on the way down. They descended only as far as their previous bivouac near the bottleneck. By then, they had run out of stove fuel, the one thing they needed to melt snow into water. At that altitude, dehydration can be just as deadly as the cold. One by one, the climbers began to separate, trying to find help or descend to safer camps. Rutkiewicz and Parmentier managed to make their way down toward Camp 3, but the Barards lagged behind. Maurice was exhausted. The weather was turning. Winds were picking up, and visibility was fading into a white blur. Soon, a full storm rolled in. Gale-force winds howled across the slopes, and the mountain disappeared into a whiteout. Parmentier waited as long as he could at Camp 3, hoping to see the Barards emerge from the storm. They never did. Eventually, even he had to retreat, guided down by radio instructions from base camp as he stumbled blindly through the blizzard. Lillian and Maurice were never seen alive again. No one knows exactly what happened in those final hours. Maybe they drifted off route in the whiteout. Maybe one slipped and pulled the other down. Maybe exhaustion and hypoxia simply forced them to sit down, just for a moment, in the freezing wind, and they never got up again. On K2, it doesn't take long. A single wrong step, a single bad decision, or a few minutes of lost energy can turn a summit into a death sentence. A month later, a South Korean team discovered Lillian's body far below, more than 3,000 meters beneath where she was last seen. It was as if the mountain itself had carried her down. Maurice's body wouldn't be found until 12 years later, resting on the glacier above base camp. The couple who had climbed the world's highest peaks together would now remain there forever, buried in the shadow of the mountain they had conquered, yet never escaped. Their story became one of the most heartbreaking chapters of that deadly summer, when 13 climbers would lose their lives on K2. But unlike many of the others, the Barards weren't strangers who met on the mountain. They were partners in everything, right up to the end. And in a way, their final ascent wasn't just about reaching the summit of K2. It was about the bond that carried them higher than most people would ever dare to go, together, even into the storm.
ill-fated expedition to the top of K2 was airlifted to safety today. 11 other...
More than a quarter of the people who try to scale it die.
In the summer of 2008, the slopes of K2 once again turned into a place of chaos, fear, and impossible choices. Among the climbers moving toward the summit that season was an Irish engineer named Gerard Macdonald. To his friends, he wasn't just another mountaineer chasing glory. He was a storyteller, a musician, a quiet philosopher who loved the mountains for the experience, not the headlines. He had already stood on top of Everest, and now he was chasing the one peak that had haunted him for years, K2. The expedition had been long and exhausting. For nearly 2 months, the climbers battled freezing temperatures, exhaustion, and the mental strain that comes from living at the edge of survival. Still, spirits were high as the summit window approached. In one of his final messages, Gerard wrote with hope, as if he knew how much depended on the next few days. He wished for luck, for good fortune, for everything to fall into place. But on K2, luck is never guaranteed. On August 1st, chaos began to unfold high above the world. More than 24 climbers crowded at Camp 4, the final staging point before the summit. There was confusion about ropes, responsibilities, and timing. Some climbers believed the route had been properly prepared. Others weren't so sure. In a place where a single mistake can cost a life, that uncertainty was already dangerous. The summit push began anyway, and for a brief moment it seemed like success was within reach. Gerard became the first Irishman to stand on the summit of K2. But just like so many other stories on this mountain, the triumph lasted only a few hours. During the descent, disaster struck. A massive block of ice, a serac, broke loose high above the bottleneck. It tore down the slope, ripping out the fixed ropes that climbers depended on to get safely back to camp. In an instant, the route turned into a trap. Climbers were stranded in the death zone, exhausted, low on oxygen, and with no safe way down. Some fell, some disappeared into the darkness. Others were injured and left helpless on the ice. This was the moment when people make choices that define who they really are. And according to those who survived, Gerard didn't think about himself. Instead of rushing down while he still had the strength, he stayed behind. There were injured South Korean climbers who couldn't move. At that altitude, helping someone else means risking your own life with every second. But Gerard refused to leave them. Somewhere, in that freezing darkness, as he tried to assist the wounded, another wall of ice came crashing down. The serac struck the slope again, sweeping away everything in its path. Gerard Macdonald was killed in the chaos, along with many others trapped high on the mountain. His body was never recovered. All that returned to base camp were a few personal items: his camera, his satellite phone, silent reminders of a man who had stood on top of the world, only to disappear into its most dangerous mountain hours later. Back home in Ireland, the news hit like a wave. This wasn't just a climber lost on a distant peak. This was a son, a partner, a friend. A man known for his warmth, his music, his stories, and the way he made people feel at ease. Leaders paid tribute to him. Memorials were held, and in the years that followed, climbers would carry his gear up mountains as a way of honoring his memory. But what truly stayed with people wasn't just the fact that he reached the summit of K2, it was what he did after.
Chinese mountaineer Guan Jing, who tragically died on August 12th after being struck by falling rocks while descending from K2, has been recovered and transported to the mortuary in Skardu.
In August 2025, after weeks of waiting, watching the skies and fighting through brutal weather windows, a small group of climbers finally got their chance on K2. Among them was Guan Jing, an experienced mountaineer in her early 40s who had already stood on several high-altitude peaks. She wasn't new to thin air or dangerous routes. She knew exactly what K2 demanded. And on August 11th, after a long, exhausting push, she stood on the summit of the world's second highest mountain. For a moment, it must have felt like everything had paid off. The waiting, the cold nights, the fear, the endless climbs between camps. It had all led to that single, breathtaking view above the clouds. Around 30 climbers reached the top that day, a rare success in an August season known for fierce winds and narrow windows. It was supposed to be a hard-won victory. But on K2, the summit is never the end of the danger. It's only the halfway point. The very next day, Guan began her descent along the Abruzzi Spur, one of the most dangerous sections of the mountain. It's a place climbers pass through with quiet focus, knowing that loose rocks and ice can come down without warning. At that altitude, there is no safe place to run, no shelter, no second chances. Somewhere between Camp Guan and the advanced base camp, tragedy struck. Rocks began to fall. In seconds, the peaceful descent turned into a nightmare. Guan was hit by the falling debris, suffering fatal injuries high on the mountain she had just conquered. Her body came to rest thousands of feet above the glacier, far from the safety of base camp. The altitude, the terrain, and the worsening weather made recovery nearly impossible. Helicopters couldn't fly. Even experienced rescuers struggled to move in the thin air. One Sherpa attempting to reach her was injured and had to be evacuated himself. The mountain, once again, refused to give anything back easily. For the teams below, the news spread quietly, almost unreal. Just a day earlier, she had been celebrating on the summit. Now, she was gone. Other climbers who had shared that same moment at the top began their slow return to base camp, each step down carrying a heavier weight than before. Guan Jing's death was a harsh reminder of something every climber knows, but few truly grasp until it's too late. On K2, reaching the summit doesn't mean you've beaten the mountain. The real battle is the descent. When exhaustion sets in, the weather shifts, and the smallest hazard can turn into a fatal one.
After we'd climbed the southwest face of Everest in 1975, I think we were all looking around for other challenges, other objectives to go for. And I decided on K2, second highest mountain in the world.
By the late 1970s, Nick Estcourt wasn't just another climber chasing big peaks. He was already a legend in the mountaineering world, respected for his strength, his calm leadership, and the almost fearless way he tackled the hardest routes on Earth. He had pushed through brutal faces on Annapurna, led dangerous sections high on Everest, and survived some of the most punishing expeditions of his era. To many, he seemed almost untouchable in the mountains. If anyone could take on K2's unclimbed West Ridge, it was someone like him. In 1978, he joined a British expedition led by Chris Bonington, aiming for a line no one had ever successfully completed. The West Ridge wasn't just another route. It was steep, exposed, and unpredictable, a place where avalanches could roar down without warning. Even by K2 standards, it was considered serious. The team moved onto the mountain in early June, establishing their first camps and scouting the ridge. Spirits were high. The climb had only just begun, and there was still a sense of possibility in the air. On June 12th, Estcourt set out from Camp 1 with Doug Scott and a high-altitude porter. Their task was simple on paper: carry supplies up to Camp 2. It was routine work, the kind climbers do again and again on big mountains. But on K2, routine can turn deadly in seconds. As they crossed a wide snow basin below Camp 2, everything seemed calm. The slope above them looked stable. The tents of the next camp were already in sight. Then, without warning, the entire mountainside gave way. A massive avalanche broke loose, ripping across the slope with terrifying speed. Snow, ice, and debris thundered downward, swallowing the basin in an instant. Scott, who was slightly ahead, was knocked aside but survived. The porter at the back also managed to escape, but Estcourt, caught in the middle, was swept away. The avalanche had torn loose from a huge section of the slope, hundreds of feet wide, and carried its debris thousands of feet down the mountainside. When the snow finally settled, there was no sign of him, just a silent white field where the basin had been. The team searched, but there was nothing they could do. The mountain had taken him in seconds. One moment, he had been walking toward camp with his teammates. The next, he was gone. The impact on the expedition was immediate. This wasn't just a loss. It was the loss of one of the strongest, most experienced climbers on the team. Someone they trusted. Someone many believed would play a key role in the climb. After only 12 days on the mountain, the expedition was called off. No summit was worth the cost they had just paid. Back home, the news hit hard. Estcourt wasn't just a famous name in climbing circles. He was a husband, a father of 3, and a man who had inspired an entire generation of mountaineers. His death left a hole that the community felt for years, but his story didn't end on that avalanche slope. In his memory, an annual mountaineering award was created to help young climbers pursue their own ambitious expeditions. Every year, his name continues to support new journeys into the mountains he loved. By the time he returned to K2 in 2021, Rick Allen was no reckless adventurer chasing one last thrill. He was a veteran of more than 4 decades in the world's harshest mountains, a man known not for flashy summits but for patience, precision, and an almost quiet respect for danger. Friends described him as careful, methodical, the kind of climber who didn't take unnecessary risks. If Rick Allen was on a mountain, people believed he knew exactly what he was doing. He had already stood on 6 of the world's highest peaks. He'd survived brutal expeditions, long winters in the Scottish Ranges, and even a terrifying fall on Broad Peak in 2018 that left him stranded for more than a day. Many had thought he was dead then, but against all odds, he was rescued. It felt like the mountains had given him a second chance. In 2021, at 66 years old, he returned to K2 with a different kind of goal. He wasn't just climbing for himself, he was attempting a new route, one of the purest, most difficult challenges in mountaineering, and doing it partly to raise money for charity. It was the kind of quiet, meaningful mission that suited him perfectly. But K2 has a way of reminding even the most experienced climbers how little control they truly have. Somewhere high on the mountain in July, as Rick worked on the new line, the slope above him gave way. An avalanche roared down, fast and merciless. There was no time to react, no chance to escape. The same mountain that had nearly taken his life 3 years earlier on Broad Peak now finished what it had started. When the news reached the climbing world, it felt unreal. This wasn't a reckless rookie or a climber in over their head. This was Rick Allen, a Piolet d'Or winner, a man who had spent his entire life mastering the mountains. If someone like him could be taken so suddenly, what did that say about the rest of them? His family chose to have him buried at the base of K2, beneath the towering slopes he had spent a lifetime exploring. It was a quiet, fitting end for someone who had always felt more at home in the mountains than anywhere else. And maybe that's what makes his story so haunting. Rick Allen did everything right. He had the experience, the discipline, the patience. He wasn't chasing headlines or glory. He was climbing with purpose, with humility, even with a sense of giving back. But on K2, none of that guarantees survival. Sometimes the mountain doesn't care who you are, how careful you've been, or how many years you've spent earning its respect. Sometimes it simply decides your story ends there.